All right, welcome everyone to Irrigation Orientation. My name is Yilin Zhuang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent in UF IFAS Extension Central District. I'm housed in Mid-Florida Research and Education Center in Apopka. And again, welcome to the Irrigation Orientation webinar series. So from this slide, you can see we have 8 topics lined up for this irrigation orientation. And today we are at the last talk of this series. It is what should I know when hiring a landscaper? And I have the pleasure to invite 2 of my very knowledgeable colleagues in Orange County. Miss Hannah Wooten, she is the commercial horticulture agent in Orange County, and also Miss Tia Savisi, she is the Florida-friendly landscaping agent in Orange County. Now, let's just get a party started.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Yulin. Thank you for organizing all of this. And we are so excited to talk to all of you guys today about what you should know when you're hiring a landscaper, because let's be real, it gets hot in Florida. Plants are constantly growing, sometimes out of control, even when we try to control them. And sometimes we need a little bit of help. Sometimes we know exactly what we want in our landscape, and we know that we want someone else to do all of it. That is just fine. You are supporting a over $1 billion industry here in Central Florida alone when you are working with commercial horticulture professionals. So it is a very big industry that we have here, and we have a lot of educated individuals who know a thing or two about landscaping. But first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Hannah Wooten. I'll be teaching you guys the first portion of this presentation today. I work with commercial landscapers and growers all across Central Florida, especially here in Orange County. I've got about 12 total years that I've been getting paid to work or play with plants is how I look at it. And I've worked in areas from landscapes to native plants to greenhouses. And one of my favorite things to work with are farmers. I love alternative agriculture, especially in the area of hydroponics. But today is all about how we need to approach hiring our landscapers. So our objectives for today's class are to determine your landscape goals, values, and expectations. You need to know your budget. What are you willing to pay for monetarily, and what are you willing to commit to with time? What can you do in your landscape? And who does what in the landscape? This is actually where some things can slip between the cracks. So we want to make sure that all the bases are covered so that the weeds are not the things slipping through the cracks when it comes to who does what in the landscape. And we'll talk about landscape best management practices and various types of licenses, both required by law and some not required by law, but recommended, so that you can make sure that you're hiring the best for your landscape that meets your budget. So do you want the Grand Floridian look, but on a Motel 6 budget? Well, using landscape science and best practices, you can achieve a great look that does fit your budget. Now, I picked these photos on purpose because here in my Motel 6 photo, those are actually nicely pruned crepe myrtles. They have, they're using landscape science for the bit of landscape that they have, and that's important. So whether you have a super high-end, super fancy landscape, there's science that goes into that. And even if you have something that is just intended to be green, a place for birds to come perch from time to time, and a place for you to go outside and get a gulp of fresh air, that is perfectly fine too. The truth is, how we landscape makes a really big difference. It makes a big difference in the amount of water that goes onto our landscape, the amount of chemicals that we have to put into our landscape, and what our landscape looks like for a long period of time. So some important considerations really start with communication. What do you want your landscape to look like? Do you have HOA standards that you have to meet? Now, today's presentation is not about whether your HOA standards are over the top or not. The reality is, if you purchased a home or you live in an HOA, you have signed up, you have agreed to the standards of the HOA, whether you like it or not. So you need to be prepared to meet those standards of the HOA and to support your personal values that you want to achieve in your landscape. You need to know about how much money you're willing to budget to the landscape and if you're going to take any time on your own. So the things that have to get done when we really talk about this are mowing, edging, hedging, blowing, irrigation, fertilizer, pest control, and even tree pruning. The honest truth is that all of this should be a conversation with your realtor, but that's not a conversation that happens. It's not something that really happens when you purchase your home. You're not really thinking about those long-term costs of your landscape, when in fact, the cost of your landscape can be one of the more variable costs when it comes to your landscape, especially if you're overwatering. But I have this photo here. I hope this couple has a few extra $1,000 budgeted away for that tree when it needs to be pruned. And I hope they're not expecting a perfect dense stand of turf grass to be growing there, because under that dense shade coming from that large established tree, it's just not realistic to think that they're going to have this amazing turf grass growing there for their kids to play on or for their dog to run around on. So you really need to maintain realistic expectations. So it's important to know who does what in the landscape and where licenses are required and where knowledge is recommended. So you might think like, oh, just mowing, edging, hedging, and blowing, that's got to be simple, right? Well, it can be, but there is some science that goes into that. So while there is not a license that's required by law for those activities, other than having your business and basic occupational licenses to run a business with your local county, you do want to hire someone who is knowledgeable. Believe it or not, how high you cut your grass makes a really big difference. Irrigation. Irrigation does not require a license either, but there are individuals who are more well-trained and more knowledgeable in irrigation. The Florida Water Star is a great certification program that can help to guide you to individuals who have gone through extensive training. So you want to make sure you have someone knowledgeable and experienced in irrigation. Fertilization and pest control require licenses by law for any for-hire fertilization and pest control. And in the pest control category, there are actually some different licenses required for if you're just spraying in plant beds or if you're actually treating the entire turf. So if you're in an HOA that needs perfect turf grass, you are going to need to pay for a professional who has the proper licensure to be able to do that. And then tree pruning. While a license is not required by law, which that does change depending on your county, there are some things that change as you go south. There are International Society of Arboriculture certified arborists who are trained and receive a lot of continuing education when it comes to proper tree pruning. This is important, especially because trees, a good tree can add 10% value to your home. So making sure that you're budgeting for your trees and for your landscape is actually helping to increase the investment in your property and your lungs, because oxygen is amazing. Thank you, plants. So quality landscapes take time, money, and skill. So I just want to go through some different very basic images that I created to help you understand what your expectations should be and how to be more realistic about getting what you want and still having time to play on the weekend and having money to play on your time off. So you're not just completely devoted to your landscape unless that's what you want. So we will start with what's considered a low cost, low maintenance, lower time commitment type of a landscape where your goal is clean and green. This type of landscape would be okay with weeds in the turf as long as those weeds stay mowed. As long as that grass stays mowed, there will be green things growing in all the spaces. It might not be turf grass, but the bees don't mind, and neither do the butterflies. They in fact kind of like all of that diversity within your turf grass. But the person that is going to come out and mow for you, edge, keep things clean and green, this is just a basic service to keep things clean, and it's going to keep code enforcement from coming out to your house. There are best practices that can be used to help protect Florida's water and to help this landscape look good. Really, if you have a mixed lawn, you see a lot of people they go for that golf course look, and they will try to mow things really, really low. In fact, if you have a mixed lawn, it's better to mow a little bit higher. That allows our plants to root deeper, and that gives them more access to a variety of water and nutrients through the season as they go through droughty periods and very wet periods. So we want to mow these mixed turf landscapes at about 3 to 4 inches, and that's going to help those plants to stay there even as we go through drier periods and fluctuate through the seasons. So even having someone who's a little bit knowledgeable about mowing height and not mowing your grass too low will help to keep this landscape something that is more sustainable, that achieves your goals, and has a desirable look for your needs and your neighborhood. But there's still science that goes into that. So now talking more about kind of a medium cost, medium maintenance landscape that has some more curb appeal, that's a little more cute, little bit landscaped with some shrubs. This landscape, weeds and turf might be okay as long as they blend in. You might have some landscape plants and you really want a clean mulch bed. So what landscaping activities achieve this? We need to be mowing, edging, and blowing. And this is where we need to start thinking about whether or not we need some type of irrigation. Some plants, you can select some great plants that might establish and might not need much supplemental irrigation. But you really do need to think about irrigation for some of your plants, even considering micro irrigation for some of the plants in your beds. And if you really want to start to be more on the side of nice looking, dense, fancy turf grass, then you need to consider irrigation for your grass. If that's not that important to you, you might deal with some patchy spots through the season because things might die when it gets dry, but you won't be irrigating throughout the year. And there's plenty of reasons for us to consider when it's important to irrigate and when it's not important to irrigate. And we'll talk more about our water situation in Florida in a couple of slides. You do need to think about fertilizer for your plants. Our plants photosynthesize, they get light from the sun, and they are able to produce an incredible amount of energy from the light from the sun and carbon dioxide in the air surrounding them. But plants also need nutrients. We can provide some nutrients by adding plant matter back into the landscape through mulches and other types of organic matter, but we're also going to need to consider some supplemental sources of fertilizer to keep our plants looking the way we want them to. Once a lot of plants establish, they can do just fine, and the more Florida-friendly options you select, the more likely they will continue to thrive with less inputs. So that's really what we recommend, so that you can get away with less irrigation and less fertilizer and still have a nice look. If the pest control is important to you, then you need to consider someone for treating the weeds in the plant beds. And if perfect grass is important to you, you need to consider someone licensed for treating your turf as well. Landscape science still goes into this. How we prune our shrubs makes a difference with how long our shrubs will last. And it's really good to just not remove more than 1/3 at a time. Moving into examples of a more high cost, higher maintenance type of landscape, this goal is attractive, manicured, and weed free. This turf really doesn't want to have any weeds in it. That might be required by your HOA, or it's just a personal preference. You want to have clean hedges and clean edges with nicely pruned landscape plants. You want to have a clean weed-free mulch bed and maybe even some seasonal plantings. You're going to need to have proper mowing, edging, blowing. You absolutely, in this landscape, you have to have a calibrated irrigation system. If the irrigation system is not calibrated, it's going to miss a spot during the dry season. Something will grow there. It's not going to be your grass. It's going to be a weed that will start growing there, which will then become the problem for whoever's dealing with the pest control later. That's when chemicals have to come into your landscape. If in fact you have someone who knows how to mow properly and calibrate your irrigation system properly, you will not have as many weeds or stressed plants requiring pest control services later in the season. So having individuals, even though licenses are not required for these basic services, that is where things make a difference. That is where best practices make a difference. And of course, we need to consider tree pruning. Our palm trees, actually a lot of diseases kill our palms in Florida. So it's important to have our trees properly pruned, where really with palms, we don't recommend cutting off any green material because that's an open wound where one of the many palm diseases could enter. So having someone that is more experienced with palm pruning is something that's certainly worth considering. And as always mentioned, best practices help us to protect Florida's water and keep landscapes looking good. So now a nod to Florida-friendly landscapes. These costs could be variable from low cost to high cost. That depends on your goals. It depends on your inputs, what's already there, what you want to put there. And this could be medium maintenance. It's something where you are maybe going to invest more time in weeding than you would mowing. And that's because we try to replace our areas of turf grass that are thirstier parts of our landscape with more Florida friendly plants that can thrive throughout the various seasons, the wet, the dry, the hot and less hot seasons of Florida. I guess we get some cool seasons, some cool days every now and then. But this is really a landscape that is more focused on setting things up in a desirable fashion so that you can have longer term success. There's going to be some tolerance for some weeds in some areas, and you may still need some mowing, some edging and blowing. You will probably need some irrigation, but the focus is more so on micro irrigation, where we are able to reduce the amount of water that is required for keeping our plants pretty compared to what it takes for growing nice looking turf grass. When we're growing more varieties of plants, it's better for nature. It's better for all the critters that we enjoy seeing in our landscape, like butterflies, birds, hummingbirds, all the fun stuff that really makes the day just a little bit better if we're being sappy about it. Those are all of the things that we really enjoy about living here in Central Florida, a very biodiverse place. And you do want to consider tree pruning no matter what, and you want to make sure that you're working with people knowledgeable in tree pruning. So, as already mentioned, if weed-free turf is important to you or is required by your HOA, these following things have to happen. You have to be mowing at the proper height for your turf grass. You have to have proper mowing frequency, weekly mowing during daylight savings time, every other week during the winter. Your mower needs to be cleaned before entering the landscape to reduce transportation of weed seeds from elsewhere that will then go into your landscape. You have to have a calibrated irrigation system. Arguably, the irrigation system is where issues can start and stop by making sure that your irrigation is properly calibrated. We just don't notice it until things start growing or dying later, that it was actually an irrigation system issue from many months prior. And you do need to have a solid pest management program. You need to have a program that is focused on pre-emergent herbicide application in February and November here in Central Florida. The dates differ as you go north and south. And you do want to scout for weeds, scout for insects, and look for diseases and keep records. This is really going to probably be the responsibility of the landscaper that you hire. They are going to look for weeds and insects, and the best practice is to treat with the most selective options first. In the world of pest control, that helps us to reduce issues of resistance. And if you've been keeping up with the world of pesticides, the issue of resistance is pretty significant. Weeds and insects are getting some level of resistance, and we really need to focus on using selective options and then rotating modes of action so that we are not growing things that are more resistant to the types of control that we have. Working with professionals will help to make sure that things are being rotated through properly and that you're trying to avoid some level of resistance. And if that's something that you, the homeowner, wants to do, that is perfectly fine and encouraged as well. These are just some of the concepts that are necessary to make sure that you keep weed-free turf the way you want it. Fungus needs to be focused on preventative applications. If you notice that there seems to be a fungal issue, it usually has to do with things being a little bit too soggy. Sometimes that happens naturally here in Florida because we are a very rainy state during some times of the year. If that happens, then refer to your records, start making applications about a month in advance of things. If you are stuck mid-season and you are dealing with a fungus, it's good to get your samples sent to some diagnostic laboratories and get a recommendation at that time in the year. The University of Florida has an excellent world-class turfgrass diagnostic service. If you are having a turfgrass meltdown, $75 is a drop in the bucket for figuring out exactly how to deal with the turfgrass meltdown. So call one of your local extension agents if you think this is something that is worth exploring, or communicate to your landscapers some of these options if you need to explore further. So who does what? What if you mow the lawn, but someone else is supposed to do irrigation and pest control. That is a pretty normal situation, right? So it's really important to know who does what in the landscape and make sure that something is not slipping through the cracks. You're not just assuming that someone else is doing something, and making sure that you're not stepping on each other's toes is also something to be aware of. I have heard of some situations where there are very involved parties, homeowner, landscape maintenance crew who actually does the mowing and edging. And then there's this completely separate fertilizer and pest control crew. So you have 3 different parties that are working in a landscape. And if everyone is messing with the irrigation controller, things can get really weird. Or if no one is messing with the irrigation controller, things can also get weird. So this is just your reminder that it's important to know who does what in the landscape. Because if the mowing really does impact where you might get weeds later. If you mow too low, you could scalp the grass, and where that grass gets scalped, where you just cut away the turf grass down into the root zone, then weeds will grow there instead of your turf grass, and that becomes your pest control person's problem. So proper mowing is really where it all starts. Actually, proper soil, but we don't have time to go into that, but some of my other colleagues have already talked about that. Really, setting things up, right plant, right place, making sure that turf grass is a suitable plant for that environment is actually where things start. And then the mowing is the next most important thing. So for budgets in quotes, there are different ranges. You need to know what time and what money you can commit to and make those determinations. And here is a chart from another extension service that helps to rate working with different landscapers. So this is one of those home ownership things that is extra work for owning a house, where it's important to talk to a few different people, just like you would talk to a few different people for putting a new roof on your house. You would want to get a few different quotes. You want to see who's nice to talk to, who seems like they actually know what they're doing, and who can accomplish the goals that you need. You can use this to help make some ratings, keep some notes, and we do have a worksheet that can help you to select licensed personnel and check certain things that are important that we can send you in a follow-up or that will be available as a resource. So why does any of this matter? So what, Hannah? Who cares if we're using too much water in our landscape, other than it might cause fungal issues in your grass and then it will look really bad for a long time? Well, currently we don't have enough water to meet our projected needs by 2040. That's why this matters. That is why how your grass gets mowed matters. That's why if you have grass or some other Florida-friendly plant makes a difference. Florida's drinking water is in limited supply and it's used for many things. Most importantly, drinking water and growing food. Notice Splash Mountain is not on there, but we have a huge tourism industry that is very significant to Florida's economy. And we know that people love to come to Florida to enjoy sunshine, lakes, rivers, streams, swimming pools, fishing, the ocean. This is an amazing state. And while we are blessed with about 55 inches of rainfall a year, we have a heavy demand. We have a very high population. we have a lot of turf grass, and that turf grass actually uses over 50% of Florida's drinking water just to keep turf grass acceptably green. Improper application of fertilizer can result in nutrients leaving your landscape and going into the water. That's how algae blooms happen. That's how eventually fish die and how lakes get choked out with weeds. So managing landscape expectations and employing science that can help us achieve our goals is really the best way that we can move into the future with enough water to keep Florida beautiful, keep Florida productive with growing food. We are very agriculturally productive. That is a good thing for this state, economically and for our resources. But the best way we can meet our water supply goals in the future is water conservation. And I don't know about y'all, but I'd rather it start in the landscape than in my shower or my personal habits. Let's start in the landscape. Our personal habits absolutely make a difference, but our landscape is an obvious place to start. And when you look at the amount of water that goes on turf grass, it's significant. So that's why these best practices do make a difference so that we can achieve environmental, social, and economic sustainability. And Florida-friendly landscaping practices are the best way that we can do that in the landscape. So here's a reminder of what's required for who and what type of service. And just know that how you mow and how you irrigate directly influences weeds, pests, and disease. And here you see some scalped turf grass where weeds will come in and grow in that area over time as that grass gets more and more stressed in that spot. So mowing, hedging, and blowing does not require a license, but the license that is recommended would be the Green Industry's Best Management Practices certification, or the FNGLA, that's the Professional Association for Horticultural Professionals in Florida. That is an industry standard for horticultural knowledge. And here you have links to see where to check the credentials for both of those types of individuals that could be working in your landscape. And they'll know to keep grass clippings out of the drain. Irrigation, there's no license required, but the Florida Water Star license is recommended. And this is something that is through the FNGLA, the Florida Nursery Growers and Landscapers Association. And here you can also check that credential. These folks would help out with checking for monthly repairs and calibrate your irrigation systems. Fertilizer does require a license for hire fertilizer application in urban areas. The Green Industry's Best Management Practices certification is the certification that allows an individual to qualify for a fertilizer applicator's license through the Florida Department of Agriculture. Plants need nutrients to stay healthy, but too many nutrients leads to pollution. So working with a licensed applicator is not only necessary, but is required. Here is where you can check their credential. Pest control, a license is required by law for any for-hire pesticide application. The best approach is integrated pest management, and there are different licenses for individuals working in just plant beds compared to individuals actually working in the turf grass. You can check those credentials through the Florida Department of Agriculture public search. And here is an overview of integrated pest management practices, starting with the right plant in the right place, making sure that you're selecting plants that will thrive in the landscape as it is. Then we focus on physical and mechanical removal using mulch, good pruning practices, and even trapping or hand squishing insects or pulling weeds. Then we focus on biological controls where Good bugs are encouraged in the landscape, and biodiversity is encouraged to help manage the bad guys in your landscape. And we leave chemicals as our silver bullet, as the tip of the iceberg last resort option, so that we can keep our chemicals highly effective without overusing the silver bullet. And finally, tree pruning. There is not a license that is required, but it's highly, highly recommended to work with a certified arborist through the ISA. And if you go to probably the coolest website name on the planet, treesaregood.org, you can find yourself a certified arborist. In general, there are some basic business licenses that are required, like the occupational license or the business tax receipt, personal and property damage insurance, and workers' comp. And now I am going to hand it off to my coworker, Tia Sylvester, who specializes in Florida-friendly landscaping and will tell you about a new credential for landscapers. So take it away, Tia.
Okay, thanks so much, Hannah. And there really are a lot of certifications to look at in doing the landscape. And so you want to check, for the most part, that they're just certified in some things, like Hannah broke it down, you know, irrigation, fertilizer, pest control, working with trees. So my name is Tia Sylvester, and I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent with the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Orange County. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this Certified Landscape Professional, which is another credential that is under the Florida Friendly Landscaping umbrella. Next slide. So just a little bit about Florida Friendly Landscaping in case you don't know what it is, you're not familiar with it. So it's an integrated science-based approach to maintaining attractive, diverse, and more sustainable landscape. So we want to have a beautiful landscape that's also environmentally friendly. And just click the button here. The goals are to conserve water. We want to protect our natural resource. And the other goal is to protect water quality. So like Hannah was talking about, you know, having a beautiful landscape, but not putting too much fertilizer, not over irrigating, and having those nutrients go into the runoff. So the 9 principles of Florida friendly landscaping are right here. I'm not going to read them all individually, but you know, if you can find a contractor who's familiar with Florida friendly landscaping, that's great. If they have the credential of the Florida friendly professional certification, that's even better. And you know, it starts with the right plant in the right place. You know, knowing what plants belong here in your area of Florida or wherever you might live, and choosing those plants appropriately to match your site. It really starts there. And then additionally, you know, we talk about water, you know, fertilizer, mulching, providing habitat for wildlife, and so on. So according to Florida Statute 373.185, Florida friendly landscapes are defined as quality landscapes that conserve water, protect the environment, are adaptable to local conditions, and are drought tolerant. So like Hannah mentioned, having that low maintenance, you know, low water demand, like plants that are naturally thriving in Florida that don't need a lot of additional water or maintenance. And then just a special note here about HOAs. So they can have covenants and codes and restrictions, but they may not prohibit Florida friendly landscaping practices. However, they may say, okay, well, you can have a compost pile, but you need to put it in the backyard. They can specify, you know, we don't want to see your visible, you know, compost pile, or they don't want to see your rain barrel, and you have to put that in the side or the backyard. So be sure to follow those HOA guidelines when you have them. So this image here is just about our Florida Friendly Landscape Program. And I just wanted to emphasize that we have the FFL is for all kind of levels. We have homeowners which is the Florida Yards and Neighborhoods program. We have a Florida Friendly Communities program that's more geared to development, builders and developers. And then we have the professional side, which is the Green Industry Best Management Practices program, the GIBMP, which Hannah talked about. So a little bit more about the Florida Friendly Certified Professional. So if somebody has this FFLCP certification, they're going to have received additional training from myself or another qualified instructor on specific to Florida friendly landscaping. So that's going to include the plant selection, the basic practices, the mulching, the mowing height. And so they can have this credential as a standalone, or it can be in addition to any one of the other certifications that Hannah mentioned, like the GIBNP, the FNGLA, the Water Star, being a certified arborist. So really, the more credentials any type of landscaper has, the more qualified they will be. That kind of shows like their level of education. They've taken the pest control tests, they've taken the fertilizer tests, they've studied Florida friendly landscaping. And in this certification, they receive special training on the FFL principles and UF-IFAS recommendations. Also the legal part, like what are HOAs allowed to do, because that's important to know for your municipality, for your county, for your city, whatever, region you live in. So you can scan the QR code here, and that just takes you to the website at the bottom of the page, which is guidelines for hiring a FFL professional. And it mentions kind of a lot of the things that we talked about here. So you can visit that website, and I'll put it in the chat box too. So we have some free resources online available to everybody for free. So if you just go to the Florida Friendly Landscaping website and look for our publications, we have the Florida Yards and Neighborhoods Handbook, and that kind of details very thoroughly the 9 FFL principles. The book in the middle there is also for homeowners, and it's our Florida Friendly Plant Guide. So it shows over 250 different plants that are all Florida friendly, and it helps to guide you through, okay, these ones like sun, these ones like shade, this one likes wet soil, this plant is drought tolerant, and that way you can go out and pick out the plants that are going to match your site conditions. The third book on the right is the GIBMP manual, and so that's more for the professionals. So another thing in the Florida Friendly kind of department is this landscape recognition checklist. So this is not available in all counties. We don't have it currently in Orange County, but you can check with your local extension office and see if they are doing Florida Friendly landscape yard recognition. And so you can get a little sign to put in your yard, and you have to be following some of these basic, best management practices, like having the right plant in the right place. You have to have some biodiversity in your landscape too. That's another requirement, like at least 10 species, for the basic silver level. You have to follow the water restrictions of your area and water efficiently, like using that micro irrigation. And then following your local fertilizer ordinances, that's important. And Florida friendly landscapes have to look good. So we don't approve landscapes that are weedy or like overgrown and unmanaged. It has to look good, be aesthetically attractive. Mowing to the proper height, we talked about that. And Florida Friendly also recommends applying a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch to your landscape beds and around trees to help protect the plants, protect the soil, conserve moisture, and that will eventually break down and add to the soil, condition the soil. So here's some pictures here of some Florida friendly landscape recognized landscapes, and you can see they have You know, they have some trees, they have some flowers, they have some shrubs. They're kind of limiting the turf grass. For FFL, we don't want to see any more than 75% of the yard in turf grass, because that's all one species, you know, turf grass. We want to see biodiversity, and trees and shrubs are excellent for their drought tolerance. You know, flowers can provide food like nectar and pollen for bees and butterflies and other pollinators. So this is just an example of what some FFL landscapes can look like, but there's many more, you know, but we want to see a nice assortment of plants, and that it looks good, and that it's low maintenance, you know, low water input and managed. So I think I'll turn it back over to Hannah to kind of wrap it up here. Thank you, Hannah.
All right, thank you, Tia. Yeah, some really, really great concepts, just rules of thumb for Florida landscaping for using those FFL principles. So I just want to talk about a few final important considerations and expectations and what not to expect. So what not to expect. You really can't expect that plants that are not well adapted for Central Florida to thrive in Central Florida. A great example is the boxwood. Its preferred range is not this far south, but you do see a lot of folks like to plant it in their landscape, especially if you are more from the Northeast. It's a great landscape plant of the more northern states. I guess they're all northern compared to Florida. And you want to bring that here with you. Well, it just doesn't thrive here. So consider yourself lucky if you have some great looking boxwoods, but that is not the norm. That's the exception to the rule. So don't expect plants that aren't well adapted for Florida to thrive in Florida. We do have a great Florida friendly option for the boxwood. It's called a Walter's Viburnum. And this is a much more well-adapted plant that is native to the state. And you can see here that its native range is all the way down here in Florida, and it can deal with the sandy and the sunny and the wet and the dry seasons that we have. Some real talk. I know some of you are going to be very sad about this slide, but for those of you that want palm trees all over the place in Florida because it feels like it's a tropical resort, it's important to know that there are some palms that are more Florida friendly and more well adapted to Florida than some other palms that are very beautiful, fancy, highly celebrated palms, but that just are not adapted to our sandy, hot, humid climate. So you can see here that a sable palm is a wonderful Florida native palm adapted to a very wide variety of conditions that goes for about $500 to $1,000 for the tree plus installation. You look at the very popular Sylvester Palm, which is a non-native palm tree that needs a pH in the soil to be in the perfect range and perfect palm fertilization and pruning. This palm tree is going to start at a minimum of $7,000, not including installation. So here you can already see how the impacts of Florida-friendly landscaping go beyond just our irrigation, but right into our pocketbook. What not to expect: green grass year round. I'm sorry, you just can't expect it. We have seasonal fluctuations that impact plant growth. It's just science. Lower light levels, think about the holiday season when we have longer nighttime. That reduces the amount that plants can photosynthesize, so they're not growing as rapidly. And there's less water in the cool and the dry season, which also slows growth. Don't expect strong turf grass under oak trees or in shade. Sometimes different varieties might do better under different conditions, and best practices will help to have maybe a better situation with grass and shade than not. But again, if you have nice looking grass in some shade, consider yourself lucky. That is an exception to the rule. You should not expect that. You should not expect overpruned palm trees to thrive. You are killing them slowly. You should not expect total eradication of pests. That is not a reasonable expectation. There will be critters of some sort. In fact, I'm far more alarmed by landscapes that have no bugs than landscapes that have many bugs. One of those is way more unnatural than the other. Nature, do not expect that nature will cooperate with your goals, especially when it comes to freezes and hurricanes, which Central Florida, those can happen. Don't expect quick fixes. Beautiful landscapes are a result of planning, skill, and experience. Here's a fun thing that happened in our turf at our office. It's called psychedelic turf, and that was just some frost damage that caused that to happen. What you can expect is continued research from the University of Florida IFAS Extension. Here's a great example of a project comparing a Florida-friendly landscape compared to a more conventional landscape. And you can see that the amount of water for the Florida-friendly landscape was significantly reduced. And that really the main difference, other than using a lot less water, was different type of labor activities, like maybe spending more time weeding than mowing. So you can continue to expect more research and more updates and education from us at UF IFAS, and just reflect, what are you willing to tolerate? Do weeds in your grass matter to you or your HOA? Do you have an area that's constantly problematic, and do you need a Florida-friendly alternative? And how much money are you willing to commit? What about time? So know your expectations, communicate more Florida-friendly options, and remember that what happens in your landscape impacts what happens in the environment. It impacts whether you can swim in the lake on the weekend or catch a fish on your vacation. So remember that all the things we love about Florida really start in our own backyard and with our own choices. So thank you so much. We'll take any comments and questions.
Thank you, Hannah and Tia. That was great. That was so informative. We have one question. I saw Tia already commented, but I still want to bring to attention. So that's from Stacy. She said, I think we need a new term for weeds that are growing in low maintenance yards. Is anyone working on that? Sorry, I cannot talk today. I'm thinking about tackling this next year and would love to help. So that's a really good point. And I think Tia commented, there's a term for that called the mixed species lawn. Yeah, I don't know how homeowners like that term. I think from the last few talks, we're not trying to, so it's hard to avoid weeds. It's more like how could you find peace with weeds in your yard? So I wonder if you two have any more comments related to that.
Well, something that I have found fascinating, especially getting to work with livestock extension agents, in the world of livestock and forages, it's actually quite common to purposefully mix species that are complementary to one another. So I think there's opportunity there, and I love the idea of even just changing the word weeds in the landscape to kind of think about things differently. It's more like a food plot for bees and butterflies. That's how I think of it. So, but great comments.
Great. And I saw Nick posted the link to the Florida Natural Area Teaching Laboratory, and I posted in the chat box, and from there you can see 375 species you can find. So this lists all the species. If you are interested, you can go visit that webpage. Okay, we have a question here. It's how can one get more information on becoming certified as Florida-friendly landscaper?
Okay, well, I believe, Yinlin, you put that link in the chat. So if you Google like Florida Friendly Landscaping Certified Professional, and you go to our website, our FFL website, in order to become a professional, you have to take the 6 modules that are online, and then an additional field training, which we're also doing virtually right now. And if you have other credentials like the GIBMP or the FNGLA, you only have to take the Florida Friendly specific modules of those. And then you just, after you finish those courses, you take a final exam that we grade. And then after that, you'll become certified and listed on our website by county.
Great. And just for your information, who is interested, I also post a list of Florida Friendly certified professionals. And from this list, you can also see who is an instructor. So if you want more info, who do you think, Tia, they should contact?
They can contact the statewide Florida Friendly landscaping office. We will be having the next 2 trainings like October 1st and December 1st.
Oh, it's coming up soon. So you still have time to register. Great. Yeah. All right. And the last question, actually, another question coming in, but I think that's the perfect question to end this series. So the question is, can I get a copy of this recording? Yes.
Yes, of course.
Of course, everyone register for this webinar, you will receive an email from me with the link to the recording and also the PDF version of this PowerPoint slide, and also an additional fact sheet related to hiring a landscaper. So with that, okay, not letting you go first, I forgot to mention. So we are building a web page because you know from the beginning, you see we have 8 topics related to residential irrigation. So we are building a web page to house all the recordings and also all the educational materials. It will be housed in MREC web page. We haven't published that, it's close to finish. So please stay tuned. Once it's published, I will post on my Facebook. So you can go there to access all the recordings. Before that, if you miss any previous talks, feel free to email me. I will share the link to the recordings with you. And since this is the last one of our webinar series, so also want to let you know after we finish that, probably will be next week, you will receive an email from me ask you to take a survey. So I promise you all, it will be a short survey. It will be very important to us because we want to know how good we are teaching, like delivering the message. So we would like to know what you have learned and how we can improve for this webinar series. So we'll be short, take you about 1 minute or 2 minutes. So once you receive that link, please take some time and take that survey and tell us how we can improve this webinar series. So with that, I appreciate Hannah and Tia providing that informative information, all the ins and outs when you hire landscape professional. And also thank you everyone for attending this webinar series. And hope you all enjoy your Thursday afternoon. Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.